in partnership with Cal Poly Extended Education. So we just want to say thank you very much for their support of these efforts. And the second thing I wanted to share with you is that these efforts are actually part of a larger U.S. Department of Agriculture food safety outreach project where we are working with leafy greens producers and assisting them with FSMA compliance in a very broad sense. So not necessarily just the technical aspects, but some of the things that we're going to talk about here today in terms of communication and data and analysis and things like that. So this is all part of a larger project. This is excitingly our first sort of step on this project. So it's exciting. At the same time, we'd love to be in the same room with all of you. So it's a little disconcerting that we're not together. Just a quick introduction of myself. My name is Dr. Karen Cannon. I am an assistant professor in the Agricultural Education and Communication Department here at Cal Poly, and I'm also the director of the Brock Center for Agricultural Communication. So my teaching is focused on crisis communication, shocking topic, right? I also teach multimedia storytelling in food and agriculture and science. I am lucky enough to teach the introductory course in our major in ag communications, and then I also teach a lot of different strategic communications types of courses. My research interests are specifically in how do we create effective messages when we are talking about food safety. I'm interested in engaging members of the public in science and agriculture, and then I do research in what's called the scholarship of teaching and learning, and that's really sort of the science of teaching and learning and how do we do and improve over time. Just to share with you a few grant opportunities that I've been a part of, and then I am a graduate of the University of Florida, go Gators. I'd like to also now introduce to you my colleague. She's going to turn on her camera so you see her live.
Hi everyone, hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm Professor Polloshka. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here. I'm an assistant professor of agribusiness. In terms of my teaching responsibilities, I've been teaching classes in the area of food and fiber marketing, agricultural economics, data analysis, and solving problems in agribusiness. My research interests are primarily in the area of the economics of food safety. I got introduced to this area as a PhD student at University of Minnesota. I thought the problems in this area were very, very interesting and extremely important. So I continued that research here at Cal Poly as well. In addition to conducting research in the area of food safety, I also am interested in the areas of the economics of food waste, as well as generally problems in agribusiness using applied econometrics methods. I've had recent publications in top agricultural economics journals, such as in Food Policy, and American Journal of Agricultural Economics, and so forth. And I've been very fortunate to be involved in several grant opportunities, both with Dr. Karen Cannon, who is here, as well as with Professor Amanda Laintrop, who is some of your professor in food science department, as well as Professor Erin Creer from Allen Hancock. In addition to that, I also wanted to mention that this is a project that, as Dr. Cannon mentioned, is funded by CSU Extended Ed office, but we also have a great grant opportunity through USDA NIFA, and we'll be talking to you about that in a little bit, especially for students who might be interested in getting involved in the area of food safety research and outreach. And I guess I didn't mention before, but my PhD is in applied economics from University of Minnesota. I'll be talking more to you in a little bit, but now we go back to Dr. Karen Cannon.
Thank you. So as you see, we are going back and forth. We are fortunately in the same room, but we are staying at an acceptable distance from each other. But we figured it was best to be in the same room together. So I want to share with you just a few ideas and concepts in terms of looking at where we are these days with food safety. Today, food safety, we know, I think this is for everybody on the webinar today, we know this, right? Foodborne illnesses are a major concern, not only of scientists and food scientists, excuse me, and researchers, but they're high on the list of concern for members of the public. And so this is a very, at least for us as we work on our project and write grants and things like that, this statistic or this sort of information statement here is really key. About 48 million people annually, 1 in 6, get sick from a foodborne illness each year annually. We have the numbers that CDC tells us that means about 128,000 are hospitalized. And we do have a pretty high incidence of mortality each year from foodborne diseases. So this is sort of the underpinning of our work today to talk about food safety. You all probably are familiar to some degree with the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA, passed in 2011. Full implementation is not yet, we haven't yet achieved full implementation. And that legislation, as you may know or may imagine, is complex and complicated. So we have a very difficult system to navigate through in terms of understanding what's required, not just, understanding yes, we could potentially be, visited by CDC or another government agency, but understanding what do you need to do to make sure that visit goes successfully for your organization. So you can see here are some of the different organizations involved. Monitoring, reporting, action on all of these issues involves at least this group, if not others. So CDC, FDA, USDA, here in California, which is where we are at Cal Poly, CDFA, the California Department for Food and Ag, and then, it just is a multi-level complex situation. So we're sort of in this position of having good intentions, but we have a very complex system. So as you see, our main statistic here again, this multiple agency involvement, even before FSMA, we had multiple agencies of the government all playing a role and having an important role in food safety. And so all of these concerns really, led to the 2011 passage of FSMA. We also have what you may not be as familiar with, which is our areas of expertise, but crisis management and communication strategies can really be helpful in terms of not only reducing the impact of foodborne illness outbreaks on an organization specifically, but also on, across an industry. But actually using these principles and these ideas ahead of time, we actually can learn from the examples of the past and even potentially avoid some of these crises altogether. So another thing that you may not be familiar with is that we'll talk about today is that understanding consumer behavior and making sure that we collect data and information, that all of that can really contribute to improving the incidence, reducing the incidence of foodborne illness, and really giving us an idea of the ultimate, well, I shouldn't say the ultimate, but what the cost, right, that these foodborne illnesses cost not only consumers as individuals, but companies and organizations. And so what we've learned, and we'd like to share with you, is that really we see, and granting agencies also seem to understand, and scientists and researchers are starting to really believe and understand that an interdisciplinary approach is really important. And so the merging of, for example, on our team, some of the more what you might consider quote unquote hard sciences of food science and food safety with Dr. Lathrop, combined with the work of Dr. Polloshka and myself in terms of social science disciplines, because that's sort of the perspective that we come from, that all of these things together can actually are essential in terms of approaching the problem and addressing, with real change in mind. So as you probably also know, the United States has a rich history of food safety challenges. Many of you have heard of and maybe even read Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, which was written, I think before, well, anyway, quite a long time ago. But more recently, Deborah Blum, who is an author and science communication expert, has written a book called The Poison Squad, which is also sort of a history of one man and small group of people at the USDA who addressed food safety and foodborne illness outbreaks at an early in the century. And I think it's really important to be aware of the history, to understand that it exists and that we are in this, sort of unprecedented food safety era, but that we have a rich history of these kinds of challenges. They just look different as we experience them. So in terms of what I consider to be the quote unquote modern era of food safety crises, this is kind of a timeline, and it mentions several notable, certainly not all of the notable or important cases of food safety, foodborne illness outbreak crises in this sort of era since 1993. But it does sort of note some of the important ones, and there will be some of these that I will speak about today and some that Professor Polloshka will speak about today. But you might notice some that you are very familiar with and some that are new to you. So a lot of these have made significant contributions to this, where we are today in terms of being under FSMA and having it be so complex and complicated. And then just to recognize that, even though we, have this legislation, we are moving forward, that as recently as last Friday, the CDC's MMWR Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report that I can pronounce, I'm very proud of myself, they released a report. The researchers really, looked at the data in the last, I believe it's 2016 to 2019, and concluded that the pathogens are really not reduced at the rate that we had set out as a country. The Healthy People 2020 initiative set out certain goals, and unfortunately, due to some increased incidence with certain bacteria and certain pathogens versus others, we aren't going to meet those targets. And so that's pretty significant in terms of what this means for the country as a whole. It may not necessarily seem to mean too much to us as individuals or necessarily to an organization that we work for, but as the United States, this is pretty significant that we set out a goal to reduce foodborne illness outbreaks, and we are not going to meet that goal. So this continues. This is a very contemporary issue and topic. So with that, I am going to turn over the stage to Professor Polloshka, and she will talk with you about food safety by the numbers.